Welcome to the video on the third Satipatthana, mindfulness of mind. Will you give it to me now, everyone? Thank you. So to understand the third Satipatthana, we're going to have a look at the sequence of Satipatthanas from the first to the third. And one way of thinking about it is in terms of what Buddha called the chain of dependent arising, which is a principle of how suffering comes about. It starts with what we have, the mind, body, including the sense organs. And in the first Satipatthana, we become mindful of the body, including the sense organs. In fact, when Tenzin made up his own list of body parts, the sense organs were, like the eyes and so on, were part of it. Now, from the sense organs, you move on along the chain of dependent arising. So the thing that arises is when the sense organs make contact with their sense objects. For example, eyes look at something, make contact with the light. For example, you look at a dog, so the eyes make contact with the sight of the dog, and that gives rise to feelings. And in Buddhism, feelings mean pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. That positive or negative aspect of the feelings that you have. And that's exactly what we became mindful of in the second Satipatthana. We thought about what feeling am I having? Is it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? And then we realized that those feelings arose from contact. And then, according to the chain of dependent arising, from feelings, cravings and clinging can arise. Of course, they don't have to arise, but there is a tendency for when we have positive, pleasant feelings, maybe for us to crave something, think we must have it. We have a thought of a muffin, gives rise to a pleasant feeling. We think, oh, I must have a muffin, I must have some ice cream. Or an unpleasant feeling, you might think, I must not have this, I must get rid of something. Still a sort of craving. And clinging is if you're eating the muffin, you might think, I must have this forever. Part of your mind thinks, if only this pleasure would go on forever, then I would be happy. And it's this craving and clinging that gives rise to suffering, according to Buddhism, because you crave something and think you must have it. You have a sort of illusion that if only this lasted forever, then I would be happy. If only I had that ice cream, then I would be happy. And of course, it's not true. We're designed by evolution that we're never quite happy with what we have, but our mind tricks us into thinking we would be supremely happy if only we could have this or that. Well, the third Satipatthana picks up the chain at this point, going from feelings on to craving and clinging, and looking at different sorts of suffering and the beginnings of how to overcome it. So the craving could be wanting something to be. There's what we could call worldly desire. For example, the craving could be for ice cream. So then that's a worldly desire for ice cream. You want something to be. Or it could be a craving for something not to be, for someone to go away, for something to be destroyed. And that's aversion or ill will. And both of those are essentially the sort of suffering that Buddhism is talking about. Now, those are the basic forms of suffering. You crave something to be or not to be. But we can break that down into what are called the hindrances. For example, one form of aversion is worry and restlessness. And you could say the quality of your mind in that case is distracted in some way. And that depends on, if you ask, well, what does worry and restlessness depend on? Well, it probably depends on an unpleasant feeling. Or could depend on a pleasant feeling you're afraid of losing. But essentially there's an unpleasant feeling there somewhere. Or another form of craving and clinging, perhaps slightly subtle, is a lack of energy or sleepiness. This comes about when your mind, say, has an idea of doing nothing, or you sense that you're doing nothing, and that gives rise to the feeling of it being pleasant of doing nothing. And then that pleasantness, if it leads to craving or aversion to that that feeling of doing nothing is the suffering associated with a lack of energy or sleepiness. The quality of mind in this case, you could say, is contracted. And then the final form of craving, clinging, suffering we consider is doubt. In this case, doubt whether doing meditation now is a good thing to do or something you should be doing. And what does that depend upon? Well, that depends upon a feeling that something else would be more pleasant than meditating now. You see, giving rise to sort of a craving to do something else. And you could say, in this case, the quality of the mind in that case is deluded. That sounds a bit funny, but in Buddhism, delusion means you don't fully appreciate the distinction between skillful and unskillful states. So if you thought cultivating skillful states wasn't a good thing to do now, maybe you don't quite appreciate the benefit of skillful states. So all of these things together, worldly desire, aversion, worry and restlessness, lack of energy and doubt, are called the hindrances. They hinder you from having a fully flourishing life because they are the forms of craving, clinging and suffering. But they also hinder you from cultivating skillful states, from becoming fully absorbed in meditation. And so they're listed as the hindrances, and they're states one might want to weaken before fully engaging in meditating, absorption. But they're also states you just want to weaken as part of the meditation process. They're useful states to meditate on, which is what we do in the third Satipatthana, mindfulness of mind. So you could say those are the unskillful states of mind that we'll become mindful of in the third Satipatthana. But there's also the skillful states, including, for example, of course, mindfulness. Now, what does mindfulness depend upon? Well, it doesn't depend upon feelings, and that's sort of the point. That's how we can break out of the chain of dependent arising, because to be mindful, you just have to decide to be mindful. And then by being mindful of the various points along the chain, the idea is we can break the pathway that leads to suffering. Mindfulness in itself isn't guaranteed to do that by itself. It isn't guaranteed to do that, by the way, although it might on any particular occasion, so it's certainly worth trying. Well, mindfulness can give rise to concentration, and concentration can be narrow or broad, so we'll be asking ourselves, is our attention narrow or broad? And it can give rise to sustained concentration as well, and we'll ask ourselves, is our concentration sustained? So in the third Satipatthana, mindfulness of mind, we'll be considering the overall state of our mind and whether any of the 5 hindrances are there, as well as any of the skillful states are there. And we'll just be asking, are we in the state or not? Just be mindful of it, and that's all. Doing nothing further about it other than returning to the object of our meditation. It's a fourth Satipatthana, where we use the probe of mindfulness to then do something more active in removing the hindrances and cultivating the skillful states. Well, to get going, we need to pick an object of meditation, namely one of the first Satipatthanas, one of the body meditations, and we'll do meditation of walking. All right, Tenzin. So what shall we start with?
Now we'll start with the first Satipatthana. And now we'll start with the first Satipatthana.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're going to do is just going to walk there and back
Mm-hmm.
so you can feel mindful.
We'll settle in, won't we? A little bit of first Satipatthana. So the first time, how are you going to attend as you walk?
So what we mainly do is we normally do broad first. So we always concentrate about our body.
There and broad attention, yes.
Broad attention, and then we normally move on to narrow there and back.
Narrow attention,
No.
yes. So should we do broad attention first?
Yeah.
Let's go. Well done. How was that?
Good.
Concentrating on your whole body as you walked?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now
Certainly
we'll
looked like it.
go on to the narrow attention, and then you feel narrow, like we're only gonna do. So we might just concentrate on our feet and stuff. We might, but in broad we think about a whole of ourselves. But narrow we can just break it into little parts.
Yes. So you can think about the soles of your feet as you go.
You're not thinking about everything. Like broad, you actually think about your whole body.
Yes.
But when you are doing that, we just concentrate on one thing.
Okay. For example, you could ask yourself, is the carpet warm or cold? Is it smooth or rough on the soles of my feet? What parts of my feet are touching the carpet? Curious about the foot on the carpet.
Or we can ask ourselves questions that others saying about our body.
Yes. Good. How was that?
Says that we normally do the heel. When we're walking back, we normally have the heel. I'll show you over here. Normally we have the heel, so the heel, so this foot goes up to the heel.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to do the third Satipatthana. Now I'm going to move on to the third. We're going to start off with worldly desire.
Yes, good. Shall we go? So you ask yourself as you're walking, do I have worldly desire? And all you're doing is being mindful, yes or no.
Well, you normally ask for all of them, all of the hindrances.
Yeah. But in one go, we'll just do one of them, won't we? So we'll do worldly desire going there. And
So
if you
what
spot a worldly desire, upon what does it depend?
Pleasant feeling.
Yeah. So if you spot a worldly desire, try and spot the pleasant feeling, just be mindful of it and see if you can let it go and weaken the desire.
Yeah.
Shall we go?
So what we do, we don't like, in the first Satipatthana we just did there and back. So what we do, first Satipatthana is we just go there and then we do the next hindrance coming back and then do the next hindrance coming back until we've done all of them.
Yes.
So don't just go there and back, just go there and then come back for the next hindrance. So we go there and then we're going to do the other hindrance. Otherwise it's going to take forever.
Yes. All right, let's go. Did you spot any worldly desires? What worldly desire?
I think Zoe's part in swimming and stuff.
So you had a desire to swim.
Yeah.
Did you spot the pleasant feeling that it depends upon? Yeah. And could you let that feeling go?
Yeah.
Well done. Excellent. Okay, now going back. What's the next one?
Guys. So what we're going to do there, back is we're going to do aversion and ill will.
Okay. And upon what does aversion and ill will depend?
Depends on unpleasant feeling.
Good. So you spot an aversion or an ill will.
I normally get snails.
Oh yes.
And that's something
Okay.
pleasant. So like opposite to worldly desire.
Yes.
Worldly desire is something very pleasant. Aversion and ill will is something very unpleasant.
Good. So if you spot your aversion, an aversion, try and spot the unpleasant feeling and be mindful of it and see if you can let it go and weaken it.
Now
Okay. Did you have any aversions or ill will?
yeah, I did some snow, but I just think it's going to go. So.
Okay. And were you mindful of the?
Care about it, so it's kind of weakened it.
Okay. So you acknowledged it was there. You said, okay, you're there, and it went.
Now the next hindrance is doubt.
Good. Doubt about meditation right now, if it's good for you.
So doubt's like if you don't want to do meditation.
Yes.
If it's something better than meditation.
And upon what does it depend? From what does it arise?
Something feeling more pleasant.
Good. Excellent. So just be mindful if you doubt or not, and that feeling. That's all. Okay, shall we go? Do you spot any doubt about meditating?
Yeah.
Yeah?
No.
No? All right, excellent.
Right, so what we're going to do now is we're going to do tiredness and lack of energy.
Good. And upon what does that depend?
Depends on wanting to do nothing and feeling pleasant.
Yeah, the thought or sensing of doing nothing, feeling pleasant, that's right. All right, so just be mindful of whether you have lack of energy or not. Any lack of energy?
No.
No. Oh, excellent.
Now we're going to do the fifth, the last middle one. The hindrance.
Yeah.
Not actually we've got a few questions to ask ourselves afterwards. I'm going to tell you about that.
Yeah, so just the last hindrance, isn't it? Yeah. So what's the last hindrance we're going to do?
Now the last hindrance is worry and restlessness.
Yeah, good. And upon what does that depend?
Depends on unpleasant feeling.
Good. So just be mindful if you are worried at all or restless.
Restlessness means you just want to get up and
do other stuff.
Worry just probably know what worry means.
Yes.
Worry means you're just scared or something. But when my arms it means arms. Well, my mum is always angry because I know you don't know the word arms. But my mum is always angry.
So you can be worried about your mother being angry. Yeah. And that depends on an unpleasant feeling, right? That worry. So all I want you to do is be mindful of whether you're worried and mindful of the unpleasant feeling from which it arises.
Worried, just wanting to talk in the video because it's a bit scary to speak to a YouTube video,
Mm-hmm.
but I weakened it.
Well done.
Normally I just feel like restlessness in, like I just say, then I always want to get up and like do puff my cheeks and stuff.
Yes.
That's the music.
Good. So now do you want to concentrate on your walking
Yeah.
and just check if you're worried or restless? Did you spot any worry?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're mindful of the worry?
No, I didn't spot anything.
There was no worries.
Now
Good.
we're going to do the
And were you mindful that there were no
Yeah.
worries?
Now
Oh,
we're
excellent.
going to do the skillful stage.
Yes, move on to skillful states.
And now the skillful states, we've got 3 stuff to ask ourselves. The first thing is, am I mindful?
Yeah. What does being mindful depend upon?
Deciding to be mindful.
That's right. You can do that any time you want, can't you? You decide to be mindful.
Now we're going to,
And did you? Were you checking if you're mindful?
Now
Yeah.
we're going to do the second question.
Mm-hmm.
We have to ask ourselves. The second question is, am I narrow or broad?
Is my attention narrow or broad? And upon what does that depend?
Just being mindful.
Just being mindful. So when you're walking back there and were you asking yourself if you're being mindful? Were you, when you're walking back there? I find that helps me be mindful, actually, just checking if I'm being mindful. And if you're not being mindful, you're being mindful in noticing you're not being mindful. So it actually helps you be mindful. All right, so we do checking if your attention's narrow or broad.
We're going to ask ourselves the last.
Hold on, can I just ask you about your experiences there?
Yeah.
Did you have narrow attention, broad attention, or a mixture? Hold on.
No, I just very quick. Now we're going to do love question. Am I concentrating?
Can I ask you about that what you just did?
Now others can ask me about my experience.
So was your attention narrow, broad, or both, or one of them?
Both.
So you just let it go to one or the other. So on that one, you can decide to be narrow or broad, or just let it be narrow or broad. Just as long as you're, hold on, let me just finish. So just as long as you're being mindful of which one it is, that's you're doing this part of the Satipatthana. So now you're checking if you're sustaining your concentration. All right? What was your experience there? Were you sustaining your concentration?
Yeah.
Without distraction?
Yeah.
Good. It doesn't matter if you are or you're not. You've done the job and you're just mindful of whether you are or you're not.
Yeah.
Excellent. What does sustained concentration depend upon? Does concentration depend upon being mindful? That's right. Very good. And that is the third Satipatthana. We've been through it now, haven't we?
No.
Anything you want to say about your experiences?
So now we know about craving and clinging. So now we can know when we're craving and clinging. Because most of you probably didn't know that clean for clearing stuff, but now I'm doing
Yeah. Because you had a thought when we were getting ice cream the other day, didn't you?
Yeah.
What do you want to say about that?
On Sunday, I got this delicious ice cream. That was actually my favourite out of all of them, from an ice cream shop called Sprinkles. And then I ate it and I thought, oh, I wish I could have it forever. And I realised I was clearing.
You're clinging. And would you actually want it forever?
No.
No. Because you need new experiences, don't you?
Yeah, and today I noticed I was clearing because I wanted to be in the water. Because I've got invited by a party by my friend Zoe.
Oh, yes.
And I wanted to be in the water.
So you craved the water, did you?
Yeah.
You must have it for my
And
happiness.
swim in the water.
Yes.
And I noticed I was clearing in the water.
Yeah.
So I've been a bit mindful then.
Good. So you could want it without the clinging, then that would be a happier state of affairs,
Yeah.
wouldn't it? Right. Excellent.
So now that's the third Satipatthana. Now we know about worldly desire and aversion and aversion and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Now we know about worldly desire is when we want something very pleasant. Aversion and aversion is something when we want very unpleasant.
Yeah, we want to get rid of it, don't we?
Yeah. So you should understand that. So I'll just show you examples. So for clearing. So if I wanted to, so I might not want this dog to go. So let's do example craving and clearing. Let's do craving first.
Mm-hmm.
So I might really want Mountain Dog and might see him walking down the corridor because he always gives me movies to watch and stuff. And I see him walking out the corridor and I say, Mountain Dog, I really want Mountain Dog. I really crave him. But if you be mindful, so this will be the way. This will be the good way. Mountain Dog. I thought, oh yeah. I'm mindful that I'm craving, but I'm gonna weaken it. But now we're gonna do. So that's example craving. Now we're gonna do for clearing. So there's a bit opposite because craving they are away or you see them past the corridor, but clinging is when they're actually with you.
Yeah. So you mustn't lose them.
Yes. Yeah, so what will happen? Mountain I really want. So this will be example clearing. So Mountain Dog really wants to go, but so Mountain Dog really don't want him to go.
Yes.
So this will be the good way. And I say, oh yeah, I'm mindful that I'm clean. I'll let him go.
Yes.
Right. So now we know the third Satipatthana. So now you can do it with your children and guys. Alright, bye guys.